So after all that conversation, what is the most likely expansion scenario for the Big 12? We've already told you about Andy Staples and how he thinks that the Big 12 is going to implode and that the conference won't exist because the two super conferences will be the SEC and the Big 10. And I don't think that's actually going to happen. I believe that Brett Yormark has too much prowess in this conference. Now, there's one thing. Here's my one caveat before I go into this. Brett Yormark is bringing DJ Diesel, that is Shaquille O'Neal, to the Big 12 tournament to play like a DJ set or something. He had Nelly at the halftime show of the football game, and he played that in New York on Times Square. And look, I think that's great. But look, I'll be honest with you. Brett Yormark could bring back dead Michael Jackson to do a concert, and it still might not get as many viewers as Auburn, Alabama, or Alabama, LSU, or Ohio State, Michigan. This conference can do as much as it wants with the pomp and circumstance, but that's not going to drive figures. What is going to is expansion. Money doesn't come from having Nelly or a washed up. Like Shaq's not even, if he was doing a dunk contest, that'd be dope. He's doing a DJ set, I think. It just feels a little out of touch. It's weird. It's not bringing in any more revenue. It's doing things different. I don't hate it necessarily, but it's not going to keep you on par with the SEC or the Big Ten. What's going to, though, is expanding with NC State. I think they're a good enough brand. Andy Staples would agree. He has them in the SEC and his realignment configuration. I think you bring in a Virginia Tech. I think you go out and you say, hey, look, what if we get a Pitt? What if we get a Louisville? Especially Louisville, who has done really well from an athletic revenue standpoint over the last few years, even when football isn't elite, though they were very good this past season, and even when basketball certainly isn't good. We'll get to where Scott Drew is going to fall when it comes to the Cardinals later. There is a realm in which, and I believe it's the correct one, if I had to predict today, you have to tell me what is going to happen with Big 12 expansion moving forward today. In 2 years, we'll see if you're correct. I would say that the Big 12 is able to collect Pitt. The Big 12 is able to collect Louisville, wants to collect those two teams. And I think it's still likely that Virginia Tech and NC State are in that fold. Now, what Staples failed to include here is there are talks of NC State and North Carolina having to go together. So if NC State went to the Big 12, does that mean North Carolina would go to the Big 12? Virginia Tech having to be together. If Virginia Tech goes to the Big 12, does that mean Virginia goes to the Big 12? And I don't exactly think that is going to be the case. I know that lawmakers they've just pulled their hand over all of this and said, oh, yeah, we can control it. But they can't. There is too much money for these universities, from TV deals to these conference grant of rights that they sign, that it's just not going to happen to where the state of North Carolina can say, you two have to go to the same conference and it's going to be the Big 12. I don't think North Carolina is going to be a Big 12 team. I hope they are. I don't think that Virginia is going to be a Big 12 team. I hope they are. And by the way, let's talk from a product standpoint. So the way that I view this is brands. Like, I'm looking at athletic revenue. I'm looking at how these teams are seen nationally. You know, the Jordan brand at North Carolina, Virginia brings in a whole new TV. You know, like you could try to get like a bit of a chokehold on the kind of the southeastern portion of the country if you're the Big 12. But let's talk just you and me from a viewership standpoint. I don't care about Utah playing Virginia Tech in a conference game. I don't care about North Carolina playing Iowa State in a conference game. Maybe you do, but this goes back to the conversation of, we're ruining college football. We are, right? The classic matchups that you love, the classic rivalries that you love. We're not going to see Oklahoma play Oklahoma State anymore. That stinks. Even those who wanted to see Oregon play Oregon State, like, it sucks if you're an Oregon State fan. And I don't think that's a good thing overall in the scope of the sport. But right now, when we're talking having a brand there, Virginia's good, but from a viewership standpoint, it's not. I think if the Big 12 in 2 years had North Carolina State, if the Big 12 had Virginia Tech, had Pitt, and had Louisville, I'm happy. We're in a good spot. And guess what? There's not a lot of fat we have to trim. I've got bad news for you. Northwestern is not driving in the Big Ten. Rutgers is not driving in the Big Ten. Purdue is not driving. There are brands in that conference that are weighing them down so much at the bottom of that conference that they don't really know what to do with them. The Big Ten is locked in with these schools through their own contracts, and it's a bad thing. Maryland is not in a great spot financially or bringing in the big bucks of the Big Ten. You go to the SEC, you see Vanderbilt, and you say, oh, wow, the athletic department sucks. Mississippi State is in essence a Big 12 team. Ole Miss is in essence a Big 12 team based on revenue. Missouri is kind of in that conversation as well. South Carolina is not too far off from it either. In this, The Big 12, top to bottom, is pretty even. We don't have a Vanderbilt. And if you bring in NC State, Virginia Tech, you bring in a Pitt, you bring in a Louisville, you still don't have a Vanderbilt. You still don't have a Northwestern. That's what's going to keep this conference afloat, is because I don't believe that Greg Sankey can start cutting teams. I don't believe there will be relegation. I do not think that positive attrition will happen in college football. And thus, as long as the Big 12 as a whole is deep, you stay alive. And I do think 20 teams is the magic number. That's what's realistic for me. If I hey, what do you really think could actually, like, what's the genuine this could happen? Those are the 4 teams. Now, there is a wish list scenario. If you listen to this show every day, or even frequently, you've probably heard me say it. Create a Clemson. That's my slogan here. If next week we learn that Kansas State was going to go win 3 national championships the next 10 years. They're going to be a perennial playoff team. They're going to have a decade like no other. That's Kansas State, who's never won a national championship. At that point, conferences would want to buy stock. You want Kansas State. Clemson, the last decade, has dominated college football. That's made them good. 15 years ago, you did not care about Clemson, the same way that most of the country right now probably doesn't care about Texas Tech. But if they started winning at the caliber that Clemson did, if they create their own Clemson, at that point, your brand is seen differently. That's why I believe in the dream scenario, Miami's on the table. There are so many issues at Miami right now. From being in Coral Gables, not Miami, the stadium being far away, like talking revenue and what they can bring to the table. And man, do they really reach the Miami brand? Miami, how much of a market value do you get there? And look, it's good. I'm not saying it's bad. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just, they are not playing with house money when it comes to the SEC and the Big Ten. Like, those 2 conferences aren't knocking down their door. And those 2 conferences aren't necessarily knocking down Clemson's door either, because think about it like this. If Clemson goes if Dabo Swinney leaves and Clemson goes 5 years of bad football, not even just objectively bad football, 3-9, 4-8, 5-7, which Nebraska is doing right now, by the way, it's wouldn't be crazy. Nebraska can do that. They're going to keep their brand. They're going to keep the revenue. They're going to keep the sellouts. Clemson can't. They're still not South Carolina, the flagship school of the state, who has sucked pretty much forever, kind of forever, and is still racking up money. If Clemson went through a slump like South Carolina's gone through, they wouldn't. That brand, like, think about, okay, same thing. Kansas State wins for the next 10 years. And they go 5 years of 4-8 every season. Their brand goes away. There are like 10 schools in the country that can lose consistently and keep their brand value. Clemson's not one of them. And right now, this is maybe the most important thing you'll hear in the show today. Right now, the SEC and the Big Ten, they are valuing brand prowess despite wins and losses. Clemson is built solely on wins, not on geography. Clemson's not built on being in a big TV market. They are built solely on wins. You can create that in Manhattan, Kansas. And the Big Ten and the SEC doesn't want that. So I believe in a dream scenario. There is a dream scenario where I'm not crazy, where Miami and Clemson do end up in the Big 12 because they're just not as pretty as they think they are when it comes to the SEC and when it comes to the Big Ten. Because anybody can create a Clemson. Anybody can create a Clemson. You win for a decade, you will skyrocket into the top 20 in national athletic revenue. Your budget will skyrocket. But the second you start losing, everything flips. Everything flips. Unless you're Nebraska. Unless you're Florida State. Unless you're Texas. We just saw it with Texas. So if you can give me that Kansas State, if you can give me that Texas Tech, that'd be awesome for this conference. And for Clemson, it's imperative you win now. But I just don't think wins and losses can get you a ticket to the SEC and the Big Ten. I just don't. And that's why I think there's a chance Clemson and Miami also fall to this conference. If you're Wake Forest, if you're Boston College, I'm sorry. If you're Syracuse, I'm sorry. We don't want you, and I don't think anybody else really does either. Sorry. But for Clemson, hey, you would fit in great here. Thanks, buddy. Coming up, Scott Drew's going to Louisville. Oh, what? This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. There's one place that I go. I have a new intern. That is right. I hate saying intern, too. The guy's really good. He's not just an intern. He's helping run social media on Twitter. So you might see a tweet where you think, oh, that's a really good take. Probably him. Or a tweet that's, oh, that's a really bad take. could also be him at linkedin.com/locked on college. That's where I found the guy, and he's great. Right now, you have to check it out. A small business, an independent contractor, whoever you are, hiring is easy when you have quality candidates. So easy that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats. They help you do it all. Constantly finding ways to make the process easier. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. LinkedIn.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. You keep in mind that terms and conditions do apply.